Good evening. My name is Chris, and tonight I'll be talking to you about leadership presence. Now, what is leadership presence? Leadership presence is authentically and clearly communicating with your audience the ideas and expressions in your head, trying to create that connection. Now, there are a couple of different steps to leadership presence. The first step is eye contact. You've got to, first and foremost, throw away your notes. Notes can be helpful, but they're very often a hindrance from connecting with your audience. You need to be able to get out from behind the podium as well and connect directly with your audience through body language and expression, looking them right in the eye and making sure that they hear and understand and know you are there. The second step is your posture. Your posture should be tall and erect. You shouldn't be moving around too much. You should just be there, calm and assertive at all times. Just be yourself. That's really important. Just be yourself. The third step is gestures. Now, gestures are great. They are important. I love using gestures. I talk with my hands all the time. However, if your gestures are too big, too massive, jerky, they can be distracting, and it becomes hard to follow what you're saying. So you've got to keep your gestures tight. A lot of presidents, very important politicians, they like to talk like this. They do the power fist, right? Or when you're really trying to hit home and you're making an accusatory, being accusatory, what you do is you use the pointing finger and you wag your finger, right? There's a lot of different techniques, but it's important to make sure that your gestures are appropriate. When you're excited, you want your gestures to be excited. When you're calm and assertive and you're trying to connect with the audience and you're trying to establish leadership presence, you've got to be calm and assertive with your gestures. The fourth and final step is to have a good stance. Your feet should be planted, just facing the audience. Your feet should be planted and pointed directly at the audience, the person that you want to connect with. Make eye contact with them. Don't move around. Don't pace unnecessarily. If you need to get out of the way, get out of the way. If you need to do your thing, do your thing. But don't just move around the room randomly. Now that I've talked about some of the basics of leadership presence, I want to talk about something that's kind of important to me: charisma and confidence. Charisma and confidence are really important to me because growing up as a kid, I didn't always have those attributes. I was kind of an anxious child. I sang a lot, I moved around a lot, I fidgeted, and it took me a long time leading and talking to large groups to get out of that pernicious mentality. When I was little, I joined Cub Scouts and later Boy Scouts, and I worked within that framework to establish a leadership presence. And I learned later in life, after years and years and years, by the time I was, in my late teens, I began to learn that sometimes it's just a matter of just interacting with people and constantly engaging with people. All the people, all the time, everywhere you go, you just talk to people and get out of your shell. That has enormous implications to your charisma and your own competence and your confidence. It really helps to just continuously do that and just kind of accept that things are going to happen and bad things are going to happen and good things are going to happen, and you're just kind of there. You're just kind of zen, going along with the flow. So anyway, moving on, later in my life, I ended up being an Army officer, and I still am to this day. One of the big things that I had trouble with early on was, talking to large crowds, because I was still a little anxious. But over time, and with the rank on my chest, I eventually grew into my own, and I learned to just kind of accept that whatever I said was going to be gospel anyway. And amazingly, just kind of thinking that you're amazing sometimes can just give you the confidence to go ahead with things and make you feel more comfortable. To the point where today, I really don't have a problem talking to people face to face, large groups, large crowds. I might be a little anxious if you put me on stage and ask me to sing the national anthem, but who wouldn't be? In most cases, I'm fairly comfortable today, and I'm a better person because of that. Finally, I'd love to wrap up this conversation by talking a little bit about the use of programs like PowerPoint and other media presentation techniques. These techniques are extremely important. Do not downplay the need for programs like PowerPoint, video media presentation, social media, and the like. One of my favorite things to do is watch TED Talks online about a variety of topics, and they use a whole host of different presentation programs like PowerPoint. But it's important to remember that programs like PowerPoint, they are not the end in and of itself, right? Like, you can put a lot of content into PowerPoint and can have enormous implications, especially if you're not actually giving a presentation. But these programs are really, really detrimental sometimes, because what tends to happen is presenters view those programs as the mechanism through which the presentation is guided through. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever sat in a presentation and watched someone presenting and noticed they were just reading off the slide, what I'm talking about will sound familiar to you, because the person has kind of lost the plot. They missed the purpose of PowerPoint, right? PowerPoint is a phenomenal visual presentation tool, and it's great for visual learners and as well as people that learn through a written style, because you can put the critical aspects up on that presentation. But it's important to not saturate the PowerPoint slide with detail. Detail is great, but such detail should be imparted through conversation and through engagement with the audience. A great technique that I love to use is asking the audience questions, right? Keeping them engaged. I ask a question from an audience member, I ask another question from an audience member, and that way I know that they're engaged, I know that they're paying attention. It's a check on learning. It's a great tool to keep the conversation going. Sometimes you can't really afford to put too much effort into a presentation or a class. And so what you've got to do is you've got to engage the class with those kinds of questions. I really hope that people take from this talk some important lessons about engaged, authentic leadership presence. And it's important to remember, though, that presence isn't everything. And sometimes in our modern society, we get wrapped up around appearances and presence. I see it all the time in the Army. A lot of people are drawn to the NCO with lots of chevrons and lots of rockers, the guy that has all the coins in his office and a nice, immaculate presence. But those kinds of people, they don't always end up being the most effective leaders. And it's important to remember that leadership presence is just one piece of being a leader. It's just one piece of of being in the room and asserting yourself. And so, while I really appreciate that leadership presence being important, I just want people to remember that. Well, I really appreciate all of you staying here and listening to my talk. Thank you and good night. Have a good night.